Why schools train obedience instead of independence. Hey there, friends. Thanks for joining me today as we unpack one of those foundational systems that quietly molds entire generations without most people even noticing. We're diving deep into education as indoctrination and why modern schooling has evolved to prioritize conformity and group-approved thinking over genuine character, independent reasoning, and the values passed down through families. This isn't about blaming teachers or parents on the ground level. It's about the hidden mechanics baked into the structure itself and how those mechanics connect back to certain ideological currents that reshaped how we prepare the young for life. Picture this for a moment. What if the very institution we count on to build sharp minds and strong individuals is actually wired to do something subtler and more powerful? What if it systematically displaces the natural role of family, trains emotional alignment over logical independence, and leaves people more isolated and receptive to collective narratives? That's the territory we're exploring today, step by step, with clear logic that cuts through the usual defenses. By the end, you'll see why this process isn't accidental and how it accelerates a kind of social atomization that weakens the bonds holding us together as humans. If these truths hit you deep, those raw patterns or those sudden insights, drop a comment, share it with a friend who needs to hear it, and follow for more. Let's start at the roots to see how this design took shape. In the 19th century, compulsory schooling emerged as a response to the needs of expanding industrial societies and centralized authority. The model borrowed from earlier European experiments emphasized uniformity. Kids sorted by age into rows, bells dictating every movement, standardized lessons delivered in lockstep, and a heavy focus on discipline and obedience. The explicit aim wasn't to cultivate personal character or family-transmitted wisdom, but to produce reliable citizens who would fit into larger structures without questioning the framework. This wasn't about empowering the individual mind. It was about molding the collective. That foundation soon intersected with broader collectivist philosophies. Early reformers admired experiments in Bolshevist education, where schools served as the ideological engine to create an entirely new kind of person aligned with communist goals. The idea was that education could replace old family and religious values with state-approved thinking, turning the classroom into a tool for social reconstruction. Over time, this influence filtered into progressive approaches that viewed schooling not as the transmission of objective knowledge, but as a miniature society where children practiced group living and challenged traditional hierarchies. Later waves incorporated frameworks straight out of Marxist thought, framing education as a process of raising awareness against oppression through dialogue and action rather than logic and evidence. The result? A system that, while marketed as enlightenment, quietly trains conformity by design. Now let's walk through the hidden mechanics step by step, because seeing the process logically reveals why it works so effectively. First comes the sheer displacement of time and attention. Children spend the bulk of their formative years in this environment, far more waking hours than with parents or extended family. That isn't neutral. It shifts primary socialization away from the organic, multigenerational transmission of values, stories, and character that families have provided for thousands of years. Instead of learning resilience, duty, and discernment at home, kids absorb the institution's version of what's normal, fair, and important. Family influence gets diluted by default. Second, there's the deliberate transfer of authority. Schools increasingly position themselves as the ultimate guide on identity, morality, and social issues. Policies emerge that treat parental input as secondary or even obstructive, keeping certain discussions or decisions hidden from families under the banner of protection or expertise. Logically, this erodes natural bonds. When a child senses the institution holds more power over their inner world than their own parents, trust fractures. The family unit, once the bedrock of moral formation, starts to feel optional or outdated. This isn't some side effect. It's the predictable outcome of a system that claims in loco parentis while redefining what a parent should even be allowed to know or influence. Third, the training in group-approved thinking kicks in through structure and culture. Age-segregated peer groups create intense social pressure. Lessons emphasize collective projects, emotional sharing, and narratives of equity over solitary logical analysis. Grading and social rewards flow toward those who signal alignment with the approved worldview. Dissent gets framed as disruption rather than healthy inquiry. Over years, this conditions the mind to seek external validation from the group or authority rather than internal consistency. Reasoning becomes secondary to fitting the narrative. Fourth, and this is crucial, comes the pivot from logic to emotion. Curricula increasingly prioritize feelings, personal experiences, and praxis, action tied to reflection on power structures, over timeless principles of evidence and deduction. This primes generations for emotional narratives that spread through fear, belonging, or moral urgency rather than cold, independent scrutiny. The old factory bells and rows already instilled obedience. The newer layers add the ideological overlay, making conformity feel like moral growth. Put these steps together and you see how atomization accelerates. Atomization isn't just loneliness. It's the logical endpoint of breaking organic connections. Weaker family bonds mean individuals stand more alone, detached from the deep roots that once provided identity and resilience. Without that anchor, people turn outward to peers, institutions, or mass messages for belonging. The result is generations primed for emotional sweeps, less equipped to resist when a collective story demands allegiance. Family authority fades, natural transmission of values dries up, and the individual becomes a unit more easily managed by larger forces. This isn't theoretical. It's the observable pattern when you trace the mechanics without rose-colored glasses. Some voices push back and claim this is all just about building critical thinking skills for a complex world. They argue modern methods encourage inquiry, creativity, and preparation for free market realities. But let's dismantle that with sheer reasoning and observable logic. No cherry-picking needed. If the system truly fostered independent reasoning, we would expect clear outcomes. Graduates who demonstrate measurable growth in logic and skepticism, who question institutional power across the board, who maintain or strengthen family ties rather than drift away, and who show resistance to unexamined group narratives. Instead, the pattern runs the opposite direction. Consider the time investment. Decades of schooling, especially extended into higher levels, should sharpen discernment if critical thinking were the goal. Yet prolonged exposure correlates with greater susceptibility to mass formation, those hypnotic-like states where anxiety, isolation, and a single dominant narrative lock people into compliance. The more years inside the system, the stronger the tendency to trust official expert-driven stories during crises, to align emotionally with collective causes, and to dismiss dissenting logic as dangerous. If it were genuine critical thinking, the educated should lead the charge in demanding evidence and preserving personal autonomy. They don't. They often become the most reliable carriers of the prevailing emotional framework precisely because the training rewarded group alignment over solitary doubt. Another counter claims this setup is necessary for social harmony or democratic participation. Pure logic shreds that too. True harmony arises from strong, character-rich individuals rooted in family and reason who can cooperate voluntarily. Manufactured conformity produces fragile consensus held together by fear of exclusion. When family bonds weaken and logic atrophies, people don't become more tolerant. They become more dependent on the group's emotional approval, quicker to enforce orthodoxy, and less capable of the genuine dialogue that free societies require. The system doesn't create critical citizens. It creates compliant ones who mistake emotional consensus for truth. Even the idea that it's all about preparing kids for the free market falls apart under scrutiny. Free market success rewards innovation, personal responsibility, and clear-eyed risk assessment, traits that thrive on family-transmitted grit and independent thought. Yet the schooling model emphasizes collective equity and emotional validation, outcomes that leave people less adaptable, more risk-averse to non-approved ideas, and strangely dependent on institutional gatekeepers. The mismatch is glaring once you apply basic cause and effect reasoning. Stepping back to the broader themes, this process reveals a consistent pattern across the ideological lineage. From the early state models focused on obedience to the later infusions of Bolshevist and Marxist frameworks, the classroom became the place where family inheritance gets deconstructed and replaced. Themes of atomization run through every layer: time theft from home, authority theft from parents, logic theft from the mind. The end product isn't empowered individuals but isolated units more attuned to emotional mass movements than to personal conviction or familial duty. This isn't failure, it's function. The system delivers exactly what its deeper design intended, conformity wrapped in the language of progress. One early reformer captured the spirit when he described schools as miniature societies training children for collective reconstruction rather than private family legacies. Another current in the same lineage spoke of education as conscientization, awakening to oppression through lived experience instead of neutral inquiry. These aren't fringe notions. They echo through teacher training and policy, turning classrooms into arenas where group-approved thinking supplants character forged at home. At the heart of it all lies a choice we still get to make. Reclaiming education means prioritizing family authority, reviving approaches centered on logic, classical principles, and character formation outside the compulsory mold. It means questioning the emotional narratives the system primes us for and rebuilding those natural bonds that atomization tries to dissolve. When we see the mechanics clearly, we gain the power to step outside them, raising minds that value independence over approval and reason over resonance. Thanks for thinking through this with me today. These ideas matter because they touch every family and every future generation. Keep questioning, keep reasoning, and keep protecting what truly builds strong character. Until next time, stay sharp out there. Stay free.